watching Keepin' It Green. I'm Debbie Klughers, and today I have with me Mr. Richard Amper, the Executive Director of the Long Island Pine Barrens Society.
It's good to be here.
Thank you, Dick. Thank you for coming.
Nope, wouldn't miss it.
Oh, good. So, how are you doing today, first of all? What's going on with the Pine Barrens?
The Pine Barrens is never quite finished. You remember the Pine Barrens Wars from the time that the Pine Barrens enjoyed no protection at all. The public should understand that the Pine Barrens is Long Island's premier ecosystem. It's about 100,000 acres.
Wow.
It extends from roughly Route 112 on the sort of as you pass Sunrise Highway or the Long Island Expressway coming east, extends all the way to the Shinnecock Canal. That's the central Pine Barrens, and then we have the South Fork Pine Barrens that extends all the way into East Hampton, and it's basically visualized by the pitch pine and scrub oak trees, those sort of gnarly ones. The ones up in New England are all the sort of bilaterally symmetrical grades. These have their own quirky personalities and have a rough bark, and it's part of how that ecosystem functions. A lot of people out here know the Pine Barrens from the famous 1995 Pine Barrens fires, the so-called Sunrise Fires, and so forth.
You could still see the destruction that caused today.
That's absolutely, and it's going to take a while to recover from that. But it's a great ecosystem. We've got an idea of where the central Pine Barrens is here, and that is roughly from over here, which I told you was 112. We're extending out to Riverhead and the Peconic River. The headwaters of the Peconic River boast the greatest diversity of plant and animal species anywhere in the state. You know, before I knew about this, I figured it's got to be the Adirondacks or the Catskills or something. It's right here on Long Island. And of course, then it extends out to the Shinnecock Canal into Southampton. And then we have another a Pine Barren section that's out in East Hampton, which I think is right behind it. And that is where we will find the Pine Barren, open preserved Pine Barrens in East Hampton town.
Could this ecosystem be larger if there wasn't all this development? I mean, did we just take away a large portion of it through development?
Well, the answer is that we were developing, fortunately, west to east. And so while there were once 250,000 acres of Pine Barrens, we're down to 100,000 acres now. Only about 60,000 of those are permanently secured. But that's a big swath of land for suburbia. But you're absolutely right. The biggest threat to the Pine Barrens was not wildfires. They are naturally occurring for the most part.
Don't they help with the pine cones spread their seeds? It's like a necessary...
That's exactly right. The way the Pine Barrens regenerate is that these pitch pines have almost an armored, textured bark that really prevents all kinds of stuff. I'm going to skip to that particular picture. But they're very, very thick and tough. And there are a portion of the pine cones on a pitch pine tree that are called serotinous pine cones, and not to get technical or botanic here, but they are also sealed with a resin that...
and it kind of requires fire to...
That's exactly right. And the fire melts the resin, opens them up, and because the canopy has burned, now these seeds are falling on clean land with plenty of sunlight to regenerate the forest. And the forest is just a lovely forest, and it's complete with vernal ponds that rise and fall with the rainfall, and therefore boast really, as I said before, the greatest diversity of plant and animal species anywhere. And the other thing that everybody needs to know about the Pine Barrens
100%.
is, this is the key, that the Long Island was designated by the federal government to be the first sole source aquifer. And what that means is that there's no reasonable place for Long Islanders to get their drinking water. So you want to have some place beneath the ground that is not being impacted by human activity on the surface. We've got household septic systems, people who put fertilizers on their lawn. We've got gasoline stations and chemicals from dry cleaning establishments and other things. If you find people, you find waste products, and you wouldn't want to drink them.
So one of the reasons behind this whole protection many years ago is to protect our water, not just the beautiful forest itself.
That is exactly correct.
When did you start? When did this all start?
The Pine Barrens Society was created way back in 1977 by three very prescient college kids, John Cryan, Bob McGrath, and John Turner. corner. And I did not come along until they recruited me back in 1989 when they realized that at that point we were losing pine barrens at the rate of 5,000 acres a year.
Wow.
And so they brought me in. We brought the largest environmental lawsuit in the history of New York State. At the end of that process, the state's highest court admonished the state legislature to pass a law and say, let's set aside at least 50,000 acres that'll never be developed and that can be used both for recreational purposes, but also especially for the recharge of pure, fresh drinking water.
That's so great, because if they didn't do that today, who knows what could have
Exactly
been.
what the problem is. So that got done at that point, and we have been now since trying to buy up that land. And I have to tell you, the people of Long Island in general, but especially of Suffolk County, are tremendous. Almost every time we put a referendum on the ballot that says, do you want to pay a 0.25% in sales tax or a 2% real estate transfer tax? If it's for protecting open space and drinking water, the public votes as high as 84% to do this
studies
time
that they
after
are
time.
very supportive.
So we got people that are paying 2.5 times the national average in taxes.
Wow.
But if it's for this purpose, they will volunteer to pay more, and that has continued.
That's good.
The problem is that government is slow to spend it. The money's there, it's earmarked for that purpose, can't be used for anything else. But the politicians frequently listen to the people who make campaign contributions. Well, not-for-profit organizations like ours or the Nature Conservancy or the Group for the East End or any of those other great groups are prohibited by law from endorsing candidates or making contributions. Who can make contributions to the politicians, though, are the developers who would rather see the land developed than preserved. So they are basically leaning on politicians to go slow and not to buy up the land. The Pine Barrens is largely done. There are only 2,500 acres of land in the core preservation area, which can't be built, that are not in public hands. Everything else has been preserved. So now what the environmental community has agreed is, with only 70,000 acres left in Brookhaven and the 5 East End towns, we want to save half of that. And that would mean saving 35,000 acres, roughly 25,000 acres of open space and 10,000 acres of farmland. Alas, we've been trying to do this for the last 4 years, and the towns, the county, and the state are falling way short, more than 50% short of the number of acres that have to be purchased annually.
And why is this?
Well, it's mostly because of lobbying by real estate developers.
So
because the public's in favor
can't
of it.
lobby. So what?
We're allowed to say we should preserve. We're just not allowed to make a campaign contribution. And the developers and real estate people,
They've got a lot of money.
They got a lot of money, and there's no prohibition against them. So we appeal to the people because 80% of the people of Long Island consider themselves environmentalists, and 80% of them in a survey not a year ago said that despite the recession, this was a good time to buy land. Why? Well, because the prices are down.
Right, absolutely.
And so it makes sense. So the public squarely here, it's like almost everything else in government, the special interests seem to get the attention and the public interest has to fight for it. But we're making a good fight.
Good. So maybe the public can write a little note to their elected officials and say, you know, I support land preservation. I support, you know, the Pine Barrens. And
that's exactly where we are now. We should talk about where the money's coming from at a town, county, and state level. And the way to start with that would be to describe Suffolk County, because it was the first to get into this business, and the public voted 84% strong to take a quarter penny of sales tax, you barely feel it in a purchase today, and set it aside, and that program will continue through the year 2030 and will generate an additional $250 million to buy land. Alas, the county executive in this past year, 2009, preserved only 350 acres, when at one point we were preserving 2,500 acres